fifth lecture. We're traveling from southern Europe to more northern Europe, and we're starting off in Flanders.
Oakley dokley.
We've seen this timeline before. We're still in the same spot. Big green oval, all of the 1700s. The things in blue are the paintings we're looking at today. We've talked about Caravaggio in the past, Bernini, Velázquez, and now we're moving into Rubens and Van Dyck. We're not actually going to discuss the Medici cycle in this lecture, but there is a video that I have provided that I would like you to watch. It's required, it's only a couple minutes long, but it really goes into detail about the Medici cycle. We are sort of here, and I'll explain in a second, but Flanders today is kind of northern Belgium, the lower Netherlands. But at the time, it was a specific country. And if you look at this map, you'll see that these are called the Low Countries, and they were the Spanish Netherlands. So they belonged to Spain, but they were the Netherlands. There's the Dutch Republic. Remember, the 30 Years' War kind of broke this up into two different things. The Dutch Republic was at one point part of Spain. Flanders is part of the Holy Roman Empire. It's Catholic. It's a mess. And, this is an art history class, not a geography class, so we're not going to go into it. But you should know that they returned to direct Spanish rule in 1621. All of their Catholic churches were restored, and many important sacred works. And following the religious wars, artists like Rubens and Van Dyck established reputations in Flanders. That is not to say that they only painted in Flanders, because what's really interesting is, even though Peter Paul Rubens and Anthony Van Dyck were Flemish, unlike earlier painters, they didn't really stay in their country to paint. They traveled and they painted for other rulers. For example, Marie de Medici, who was the Queen of France, and Rubens painted for her. He went down to Spain, but he traveled a lot. And Van Dyck was the court painter for Charles I of England. So he was from Flanders, established his reputation there, and then traveled to England and became the court painter for Charles I, who had an untimely demise. Okay, so Rubens, what is it about him that makes him special? You'll see in a sec, but he emphasized movement, color, sensuality. This he learned from traveling in Italy. He had a Calvinist father and a Catholic mother. His dad was imprisoned after having an affair with this royal woman. His mom took him to Antwerp. He was raised as a Catholic, and then he became like a soldier for the Counter-Reformation, not only as an artist, but also as a diplomat. And Rubens can be seen as equally important diplomatically as he can as a painter. In fact, he was instrumental in brokering a peace between Philip IV of Spain and Charles I of England. Unfortunately for Charles I, this peace would eventually lead to his execution, as people doubted his loyalty to the Protestant Church of England, which had been started by Henry VIII and then carried on by Queen Elizabeth I. Rubens visited every major Italian city. He returned to Antwerp in 1609 to accept the position as court painter of the Habsburgs, the family that ran the Holy Roman Empire and Spain, and they were regents of Flanders. So one thing that a lot of people know about Rubens is that he painted bigger, plump, and sensuous women. And the question always comes up, was he obsessed with full-bodied women? Why did he always paint these larger women with fat and cellulite showing? Was this an obsession? Some have speculated, no, it's just that full-bodied women were the ideal beauty, and all that he was doing was painting that ideal beauty. But I have a third option for you to consider, and that is that he wanted to separate himself from other artists. He needed to show his technical skills in a new way. Here are chubby men, and so if you look at his obese men, then you go, well, if it's not about beauty of a woman, and it's not about like his version of what's beautiful, then it's got to be about the fat. And why is it about the fat? What happens when you paint fat? Well, if you think about past artists like Michelangelo and his depiction of musculature, I mean, Michelangelo was obsessed with muscles. Or maybe even Caravaggio and his grimy people, painted dirt on the bottoms of people's feet. Rubens needed his own thing. And so he was going to corner the market on cellulite. And think about what cellulite offers you as a painter. I mean, that's a larger surface area. You can paint the bluish kind of undertones. You can paint the dimples. I mean, there's a lot of texture in cellulite. And so by being the master of flesh, he separates himself from earlier painters. Okay, we're going to go out of order a little bit because I want to emphasize this master of flesh thing before I go back to his place in art history or his message about Counter-Reformation ideals. Because remember, even though he's in Northern Europe, he's still a Catholic. So you have to think about his paintings in terms of what the Counter-Reformation was trying to accomplish. But I don't want to talk about that yet. I want to talk about this insane painting first, because this is the pinnacle of master of fleshiness. And as you're looking at it now in its kind of bigger form and you've zoomed out, it's a mess and you can't really see what's happening. And it almost looks like a abstract painting by Anselm Kiefer or something. But once you kind of zoom in on this, the magic starts to happen. And when I say magic, I mean sheer terror. The paint handling, first of all, if you see this, it's like liquid. And the skin seems diaphanous or like silky, maybe a little translucent. This is God's last judgment, and it's depicted for a Counter-Reformation audience in a really unique manner as this whirlwind, this sucking down a jumble of the bodies of the damned. So what you're looking at is people going to hell. And there is this quote from the Bible, "Depart from me, ye cursed, into the eternal fire that is prepared for the devil and his angels." And we know that this is called the fall of the damned, so we understand what it is. But if you didn't, you could see that there's like a heavenly light source at the top, which is heaven, and then just a dark, grimy bottom, and that's hell. And as you travel down this painting, it gets darker and more awful, and the attacks from demons and snakes and hydras and lion-like animals increases. So let's take a closer look. And by the way, if you are into this painting, you can go onto Wikipedia and they got the magnifying tool and you can really spend some time on this. But here's the nightmare fuel that we're looking at. So you've got demons and other hellish kinds of things pulling and dragging on people. And I chose to zoom in on this one spot. And if you look like on that zoomed in part on the bottom right, you'll see that there's this snake-like dragon head, and it's devouring a person head first. And there's a woman on the right who's kind of above him, maybe a couple people up, and she's bound by snakes, and she has her foot on the chest of the woman below her, and you can see like the shadow of the foot. And so this painting has kind of an inner logic about like lighting sources, and just take some time. Look at all of that stuff. You can see people are being like quartered, which means, pulled apart from top and bottom and leg and arm. And you can feel the gravity, like not just the gravity of like what happens when you sin, but actually like the gravity of being pulled down. This close-up is my favorite part though, because you can see that these demons are starting to eat these people, and this man's like fleshy love handles are a perfect dinner for that demon. And look at how that woman is in this like trio is her legs are wrapped up by the demon that's pulling her down. And the most fascinating thing to me about this painting is that once you start to look closely, you can see how it's separated into individual scenes. And all of these scenes are different ways in which you will be dragged down to hell. And interestingly, this trio here is they're all obese. And their obesity suggests that the reason they're going to hell is because of their sin of gluttony or overindulgence. And the thing about this painting is, like, in 1620, if you saw this painting, if you stood in front of this painting and you really examined it, and if you weren't terrified that you were going to go to hell by being consumed by snakes or torn apart by lions or twisted and broken or helplessly attacked by an insurmountable number of powerful bodybuilding demons because you left the Catholic Church. So this is like another propaganda piece. See what happens when you leave the church? Then if you weren't terrified from this, then I believe that you probably earned the right to be a Protestant. So leaving that terror behind, I want to kind of go chronologically backwards a little bit because I started off with the fleshy stuff, but now I want to get back to his place in the pantheon of art like heroes. So in addition to his innovative fleshy stuff, he's also interested in taking on artists like Michelangelo. Like he went to Italy and as previously discussed, and he came back to Flanders and he wanted to show his new knowledge and skill, and he wanted to convey that he was as good as those Renaissance painters. This was his first major commission in Antwerp, the Raising of the Cross triptych for the Church of St. Walpurga. And it uniquely stretches the action and landscape of the central scene across 3 panels. I mean, this is telling a story that takes place over time. And that's why there are 3 separate panels, and that's why on the left you see like the crying people, in the middle you see Christ being crucified and them all struggling to raise the cross, and on the right are the soldiers that are coming in. So it's not just the flesh that's fascinating, there are compositional diagonals that create like a greater sense of drama. And he learned a lot of this stuff when he went to Rome. First, the twisting and the pulling and the straining of all these muscular men is reminiscent of the struggle that's seen in Michelangelo's Last Judgement. I mean, we just looked at his Last Judgement. So if you look at Michelangelo's and then you think about Rubens and all of the twisting and the flesh, you can see the progress that he made from copying Michelangelo to going beyond his influences. It's as if the student becomes the master. But here he's still a student of Michelangelo. He's still using the lessons he learned of how to convey musculature, how to create drama by having these writhing, twisting figures. It's not until, maybe 10 years later in his own Last Judgement in which you really get his cellulite skin pulling thing that is beyond what Michelangelo had ever done. Anyway, I want to get back to this painting because I want to talk about how this painting is a conscious decision to crucify the Son of God. And so it has to be shown that those who did this knew full well what they were doing, and they struggled and they were working hard to crucify Jesus. And this is a Counter-Reformation painting. And so this is a message to Protestants. Hey, you Protestants, you understand your actions and you will be punished eventually, just like those who actively killed Jesus. And this attitude is exactly what causes the persecution of the Jews and explains why they were seen as scapegoats for all the problems that plagued Europe, because in the end, Christians blamed the Jews for killing Jesus. And so in Europe at the time, the Catholics had 2 enemies, the Muslims and the Jews, and now they have a third, the Protestants. And by emphasizing the struggle to kill Jesus, Rubens is showing the strength of the Catholic Church. Because in the end, if you follow the story all the way through, Jesus comes back. And he's more powerful, just like the Catholic Church will be once this is all sorted out. Which shows that Rubens was a far better painter than he was a prophet or someone who can see what's going to happen in the future. Okay, we're going to leave the heaviness of being a Catholic soldier behind, and I want to talk about the Fur, which is the portrait of Helena Formant. And she was Rubens' second wife, and when he married her, she was 16 and he was 53. And even back then, it was pretty unusual for that much of an age difference. So this is similar to Mona Lisa, in which her expression is hard to read. There's a contrast between the fur coat, the most outer layer, and her bare skin. So I have some Easter eggs here for you, because I want you to know that this isn't just a portrait of his wife. He was trying to equate her with the Venus, and even similar to Botticelli's Venus. Again, this calling back to great artists and surpassing them. So Rubens paints his wife naked as she emerges from the bath, posing like the Venus by Botticelli. And the earring that she's wearing is called a Venus drop earring, which is a natural pearl mounted on a piece of metal, probably gold and dangling from the ear. So I think he knew what he was doing. I think he knew that he was comparing his wife to Venus, and it wasn't an accident that she's wearing this earring. But what I'm fascinated by, besides this allusion to Venus, is that the proportions of her body are all wrong. If you look at that lower arm and how it reaches across and pulls the fur towel over, it looks like her arm would have to be like 12 feet long. And then, if you look at her legs and if you follow them up, her body should not be twisted the way it is on the top. Like the top and bottom of her body don't match. And why is he doing this? Why is he messing with all of these different proportions? He might have learned from the Mannerists because of his travels to Italy, how messing with proportions stops you and makes you stare at a painting longer trying to figure it out. I'm not sure, but I'm fascinated by this painting because it doesn't work, and it works really well because of that. The last painting we're going to look at by Rubens is Prometheus Bound. And again, we've jumped all over the place chronologically, but I'm trying to tell a story, and so it works out better this way. So when he would do paintings like this, he had like an entire studio of people working for him. And one of the things he would do is he had people come in and paint specific parts of the painting. And so that giant eagle that is devouring the liver of Prometheus was not painted by Rubens. It was painted by Franz Snijders, who was famous for being an animal painter. And this is early on in his career still. He hasn't been painting that long. And so he still is copying the old masters. And you can see that the tenebrism in this is very reminiscent of Caravaggio. And there's this energetic brushwork that you can see in his style that we see in like the cellulite and the flesh, like the softness and the brushiness of the brush strokes. And these two things might not seem related, the Incredulity of St. Thomas by Caravaggio and this Prometheus Bound, but they are related in a number of ways. Now, one of your questions that I'm going to ask you in the lecture response questions is compare these two and tell me how they're similar. But I'm going to give you a few clues. First of all, Prometheus is the god that gave light to people. So if you look down at the bottom of that painting on the Prometheus Bound, on the left side, you'll see that there's like a candle or something burning down there. In fact, Rubens added on like an extra bit of canvas just to include that light. And the other thing is that that's not where his liver is located. The liver is far further down on the torso. And so that eagle is supposed to be devouring his liver, but he's not eating it in the right place. So I think I've provided a couple clues for you, but I want you to look at these two paintings and I want you to tell me, how are they similar? One is a Greek god, the other is the son of God who was recently resurrected, but there are similarities in here, and so tell me what you think. Okay, that's it for Rubens. Part 2 will be all about Anthony van Dyck and his time painting for Charles I. And we might talk about how he has the coolest facial hair in history.